word. And let me go ahead and pop open my VS Code, and we'll just make a new file. So as you guys know, today is going to be the first day of Module 2, which is our web unit. Or I guess more specifically, it's the start of the unit where we start talking about how to actually build a web page. So what are some things that we need to know off the bat before we start off? Well, web pages are made out of HTML and CSS. So HTML is, let me see if I remember this, hypertext markup language, and CSS are cascading style sheets. So basically, the HTML of a website is all of the stuff on the website, essentially. I don't know why that just went in a weird color. Here, let me just save this real quick as, where's text? Sure, we'll save this markdown, and we'll just say notes. There we go. Okay, now that went away. So going back to the topic at hand. So what is HTML? HTML is hypertext markup language. This basically creates everything that you will see on a website. So creates all the stuff you see on a website. So for example, if you were to go to like Google and we go to the Google homepage, you have like the Google Doodle in the background. You have the search bar, you have the little thing that you can click to search. You have like your sign in to Gmail and all of that. All of those things that you see there are all HTML elements. And CSS, or cascading style sheets, basically makes your web page fancier or prettier. So if you have a web, like the default for most websites when you're coding in strict HTML is Times New Roman in black font and a white background. That's really boring. So if you wanted to say like add in like a blue background to your website, or insert an image somewhere and make it a background, etc. That stuff all interfaces with CSS, or cascading style sheets. And then the last part is JavaScript, which doesn't really stand for anything. But this basically makes your web page do stuff. So in for example, if you're back to the Google example, actually here, let me pull up Google in my browser right now and share my screen. Where's Google? Google. Okay, hopefully you guys can see my Google Chrome browser now. I'm gonna assume so. Okay, cool. So just breaking down what we see in front of us. We've got an HTML page, which is google.com. I've got a bunch of links up here to like to Gmail, to images. I've got this nice Google image right there. I have all of these widgets, etc. Yes, this is the only browser on my computer that is in light mode. So hopefully it's light where you are. If it's not, good luck. But my computer is in dark mode. So again, so all of the things that we see right here are all rendered HTML components. Render for us basically means it shows up on the screen, and HTML components are HTML components. Now, for example, these are all of my previous searches. Now, if I were to not click in here, how does the website know, hey, when I click in this, I need to show this drop-down menu? Well, that's more than likely going to be some sort of a JavaScript script that says, hey, on user click in this search bar, show their past 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 searches, for example. Or similarly, if I were to click, let's say, my Google Sheets link, then that's a hyperlink to a Google Sheet. which is a link attribute in HTML. Now, another thing to notice, like for example, the Gmail font here, it looks kind of nice. And the color in the background isn't exactly black. It looks like a little bit like of an off gray. How do we create that instead of just keeping it black and blue or white? Well, that uses CSS or cascading style sheets. So this is all great stuff, but I could be completely making this up for all anyone knows. So for any website, there's a way to go and see the HTML code of it, which is where, at least in Chrome, you right click. In other browsers, you should be able to do the same thing. And you'll go all the way down to the inspect frame, or the inspect thing down here. And if you click that, and we go to the right-hand side, we see a bunch of stuff show up. So let's break down what on earth we're seeing here. So I'm going to minimize all the tags, and we'll go from the top. So let me zoom in on this a little bit. Perfect. Okay, so the first thing that we see is that this is an HTML page. How do we know that? Because it starts off with this little tag that says doc type HTML. So that's generally something that you'll see on top of most, if not every web page. And it's something that I recommend you guys include when we're making our own web pages too. The next thing after that we see is this HTML tag. We don't need to bother about the stuff at the bottom, to be honest. Here, let me see if I can minimize that. Perfect. So here we have an HTML tag. The dir and lang, etc., those we don't need to worry about. But the main thing to keep in mind is here we have an HTML tag, and here we have another HTML tag with a slash on. So the HTML tag here basically means that we are opening the HTML. So think of it sort of like an opening parenthesis or an opening curly bracket. And then the one with the backslash or the / HTML down here essentially closes our HTML page. So whenever you create an HTML file, you're always going to have your doc type HTML written on top, then your HTML tag and your closing HTML tag. Because again, the HTML tag opens the website, the /HTML closes the website. So that everything that's on your page is going to live within that HTML/HTML bit. Now inside of that, we have some more stuff. We have a header. This has a bunch of different things in it that I'm not going to go into right now. But we see here this has like a char set. This has a title, which is the title of our web page. And we can name it to, I can basically set this to whatever I want. I could say this is a website title and hit enter. And we see that it updates itself right up here. It says this is a website title. Just note that by typing that, I'm not actually hacking Google, because if I reload it, it just goes right back to what the web page has with the old title of new tab. But it's a nice way to play around with the features of a website without completely breaking it. So we can just change this like this is a title. And again, the title of your web page, which goes in the header, is what shows up here. And then a bunch of these are styles. So this is a bunch of CSS. So for example, here it says body, the background is going to be FFFF, which is white in hex code. We can probably change this. Let's see. If I say background is, okay, it doesn't look like that wants to change. That's fine. But this is all CSS. And I'll go into that and what all of this is in a little bit more detail shortly. We don't need to worry about any of this. This is just more, in the header is generally where you want to put all of your stylings, everything that makes things fancy. And that's really about it. So the last thing we're going to move on to is the body. And also in Chrome and Firefox, if you mouse over something in the Elements tab, it will highlight what thing it is you're mousing over, like in here. So if I mouse over the body, it shows you that the whole thing, my entire screen, is basically all enclosed in this body, close body tag. So we can go in and see what's inside of this. We have an iframe for our background image. That doesn't show us anything. Then we have another thing that shows the modules shown to the user. That also doesn't show us anything. And then we have some scripts and some style sheets. And that's about it. So this is basically the code of your Google homepage. So does anybody have questions about anything I just ran through before we actually code our own HTML page, or are we good to go? Okay, I'm going to assume we're good to go, but if anyone has questions about anything along the way, please let me know. All right, so now that we've seen what a web page looks like, or I guess what the code of a website looks like, obviously the next thing that we're going to want to do is figure out how to code our own. So what I've done here is I've just opened up a new file. I've called it an HTML demo.html. And let's start making this into a website that we can actually use. So the first thing that we're going to do is set our doc type. And it says here it's a preamble for the HTML document. The first thing that we put, it says, and also these are angle brackets. So that's the way that we open and close our commands, you could say, or tags in HTML. So we're going to say capital doc type and then HTML in lowercase. Then after that, we're going to create our HTML element. So as it says here, it represents the root of an HTML document, which is, again, we're going to create one tag at the top to open it, and then automatically VS Code should autocomplete this for you. As soon as you create one tag, it'll create a closing tag for it. That way you don't forget it later, and so you don't cause problems for yourself when running the HTML page. So we're going to create our opening and closing tags that say, hey, all of the HTML stuff I want is going to go in here. And now we can create a header. So there are 6 headers from H1 through H6. H1 is the biggest, H6 is the smallest. And we can basically just type in hello world. And that should be pretty good. So what did we just do? Well, first off, we started by saying the doc type of our HTML. Oh, wait, is my screen share paused or is it good? Okay, perfect. So yeah, we're running through the document real quick before I actually run the file. So when I start things off, I'm going to create a doc type HTML, which says, hey, this thing that I'm running is an HTML document. It's got HTML code. I need this to render as a website. Then we open it up by saying that there's an opening HTML tag. Then we put in another opening tag for our header. We say whatever we want to say, and then we close the header, and then we close our HTML tag. So any questions about the structure of the website, or what I mean when I say like opening and closing tags or anything like that?
Is there any other doc type?
Good question, actually. I am not sure. But let's see. If we just say, let's try that again. So if I say doc type, at least here it doesn't look like it.
Okay, just curious. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem. I don't think there are though. This
You'll
is
have
like
different ones for XML schema, that sort of thing. But it's not a doc type. It doesn't say doc type. It just says, XSD schema or, whatever type of document that you're creating.
Yeah, oh, thank you for that correction, Corey. I did forget about the XMLs, but we're not gonna be seeing those. More than likely won't be seeing those at all here, and they're also like slowly dropping out of use over time. But yeah, that is a good point. But yeah, going back to Joyce's original question, the only doc type that we actually have, like for all intents and purposes, is just the HTML one. Any other questions about what we coded before I run it? Okay, So if not, what we can do is I'm gonna go back to my browser real quick. Where'd it go? Browser. Okay, hopefully you guys can all see my screen now. And I'm just gonna open up the demo file in here. And look at that, we have a website. It's a really boring website, but it is a website. So how do we know that this is the website we made? Well, we can go back to inspect element and we can see this is everything that we just typed. Any questions about the differences or how any of this translates to the stuff we see? Oh, all right. And oh, okay. Actually, I'm gonna step out for 2 minutes. So let's take like a 2 minute break and then we'll come back at 5:55. Okay, cool. We're back. So again, just to reiterate what we did prior to the very tiny break, the doc type HTML line says that our website or the thing we are making is an HTML document. The HTML tag basically opens our HTML document. We don't have anything in the header because our website, as of right now, does not have a title. If we want to give our website a title, which is the thing that shows up in our browser, we can edit this. Oh, well, I guess we can't edit this right here. Let's edit as HTML. There we go. We can say, I am a title, hello. And if we exit out of that, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, here, let's refresh that. Never mind. Well, we'll edit the header when we go back. So another thing to keep in mind is even though we never declare this body closing body in our VS Code, automatically Chrome created it for us when rendering our website. Why did it do that? Well, in HTML, basically everything we create is going to be in the header, which is where the title lives, or the body. There are exceptions to this, but for right now, we're not going to talk about those. That's just a general rule that we're going to talk about. Inside of our body is where we have our H1 tag, and our H1 tag is this header over here. So this is this guy. Then this entire thing is the whole HTML page, and that's our H1 hello world. We close that, and then after that, we can close the body and then close our HTML page. So let's go and make this a little bit more complicated. So we can go back here. So we've created our HTML. Now let's go ahead and add a header to our page. So we'll add in head and /head closing tags. And then inside that, we can go ahead and say add a title and say my first web page, for example. And we'll do all of that within our header. Now, instead of doing going straight to the H1 tag, what I want to do is create a body for our website. So we'll enclose this in body and /body tags, like so. Is everybody following around? Or is everybody following along okay? Is anybody having any trouble reaching this step so far? Okay, perfect. I'm going to assume not, and we'll keep going. So something to note, we can have, let's see, H1 tags are basically one of the most common. It's your header. We can also just type normal text underneath. So we could say, let's add in, oh, it's also a good idea to tell you guys about break returns. So break returns or BRs are essentially the same thing as a new line. So if we want to create space between our title and like our other text, like this is normal text, we have to use a break return to do it. Here, let's switch back to our website. Let me open up my browser one more time. And where'd she go? Browser. There we go. So as we can see here, we'll go back to my inspect elements. So in our header now, we have a title, which is my first web page, which shows up at the top here. Inside of our body, we have our hello world, H1, which is our header. We then have a break return, which is the little space between this guy and that guy. And then we have our this is normal text that shows up right underneath. One other thing to note, you guys might have seen this very briefly, but if I would like mouse over this whole thing, it looks like we're seeing some boxes. So if I, let's say, mouse over the H1 in the hello world, I'm seeing this blue box, which looks like it might show the width of our web page but it only shows the height of hello world. Then I'm seeing this other thing, which is this like orangey box, which is even bigger. Why are we seeing all these boxes? Well, the reason that we're seeing these boxes is because each box corresponds to an element of our HTML page. So let me see if I can zoom out. Aha, there we go. So let me put this back. So our HTML page is essentially just a giant box full of smaller boxes. It's basically boxes all the way down. So if we look at, let's say, our HTML element, we see that each box has a margin. It's got a border, it's got padding, and then it's got the size of the elements inside it. Now, our HTML tag takes up the whole web page because the HTML tag is the web page. So it doesn't have a margin or a border or padding. Similarly, our header doesn't have these either, and our title doesn't have them. But if we go to our body, for example, you'll see that I've got my body selected right here. And if we go back to the HTML takes up this whole big blue box, but the body does not take up the whole blue box. Why is that? Well, by default, the body has an 8-pixel margin on all sides, which is what we see right here, and it shows up when we mouse over it. It doesn't have a border, it doesn't have padding, but the result of that is we can now see what's inside it. And the amount of space inside of our body is 709.333 pixels by 94.104 pixels. Now, inside of our body, we have the H1, our hello world tag. Now, this guy has a border, has margins of 21.4 pixels on the top and bottom, but not on the sides. Doesn't have a border, doesn't have padding, but this is the amount of space inside it. Our break return doesn't take up any space. It just takes up space vertically. And then our normal text doesn't have any borders associated with it. That's kind of weird. Does anybody have any ideas why my this is normal text doesn't show a big box, but this hello world does?
Is it because it's not in a tag or it doesn't have like an opening and closing tag?
Exactly. Yes. So whenever we enclose something within a tag, it becomes an HTML element. And all of the HTML elements on the page take up space. So if we go back to Google over here, and let's see, where did we go? Layout or computed? I think it was computed. And I start mousing over things. If we, wait, let me double check that I'm doing that right. Not doc type. Yeah, let's refresh this. So if we mouse over everything here, we see that all of the things inside here are all boxes. We've got this little thing up here, not sure what that is. Then we've got like a larger like flex box on top, which is a div. We'll get into what divs are shortly. And that contains like all of my Gmail, my images link, the thingy with my U on it, and all of these are all boxes. Then I've got this Google logo, which is a box, but that's contained within this way bigger box of blue stuff that's content. Then I've got, all of these things in boxes within this container over here. So HTML content is all boxes all the way down. So if I mouse over this is normal text guy, because it's not within any tags, it's just part of the bigger overall body. So it takes up the main body. It's part of the main body block. But hello world is not just part of the body. It's part of HTML, then body, and then hello world. And we can see that progression down here, right? So it starts with HTML, then we go to body, and then we go to our H1 tag. Versus for the this is normal text, it just goes HTML, body, and text. That's about it. Let's see, what other things are good to talk about before we keep going? So there's multiple other things that we can do. Let's go back to our demo page. So we talked about our header tags, right? You've got H1. We also have smaller tags. We can do like this is a smaller heading, which is H2. If we go back to our website, we can see that this one is our H1 tag. This is our H2. The H2 tag is smaller than the H1. And again, we have H1 going through H6. So the H6 tag at the end of the day is pretty tiny. What other things can we do? We can bold, italicize, and underline text. So if I want to bold something, we can bold it using the B tag or boldface and say, this is very bolded. Then we can also italicize using I. So we could say italics, and we can also underline and underline like so. Where is the new share? Share, first web page, go here. So we see that again, says this is normal text. This one is very bolded. The italics one is italicized. Underline is underlined pretty clear. Now, I have a question for you guys. This goes back to something that we talked about. So this is normal text. This is on a separate line from this is very bold, which is on a separate line from this is italicized, which is on a separate line from underline. Why do they all show up in the same line here, even though I wrote them in separate lines in my code?
You don't have a break anywhere in between them, so they just all get stringed after one another.
Yep, pretty much. So if I wanted to, let me double click this. So what I could do is, let's say I wanted to put in a break right here. We could do it in italics. Oh, okay, here. I think I'll have to go back and do that in my VS Code. But yes, so that was correct. So if I wanted to create actual vertical space, even if you do it inside of your HTML file, you still have to put a physical actual break return, because otherwise it will not stagger things vertically. And we see that right here. So I just added in a break return, and now it finally makes that jump from italics to underline. The reason that we have to physically insert a break return instead of HTML just knowing, hey, do everything all is whenever I hit enter, make an actual physical new line, is because people used to be able, and you still can, write HTML code for a website all in one line. Because again, HTML is just a series of opening and closing tags. So hypothetically, I could do doc type HTML, then right next to that HTML, and right next to that head, then title, and close head and body, all in the same line. And that would never create any space between any of the elements. So the only way to do that is to insert a BR for your break return. Let's see, what other things can we talk about? We can talk about, yeah, okay, we can do links as well while we're here. So we'll go back here. We can also link to other websites. So we can say if for that is use an A tag. And as it says here, if the A element has an href attribute, then it represents a hyperlink labeled by its contents. So ahref, as it says here, it contains a URL or a URL fragment. We'll get to that later on in order to point to a link. So let's say that I want to go to http://www.cnn.com. And we close that, and then we could say this goes to CNN. So what does this line do? Well, first thing it does is it sets up an A tag. So this whole thing, as we can see by the backslash, it's all an A tag. Now, the href bit is spaced off from the A, and it's also in a very slightly different blue. The reason for that is because this href equals is now what's known as an attribute. So again, going back here, if the A element has this specific href attribute, then it represents a hyperlink. Otherwise, if this wasn't there, it wouldn't go anywhere. So whenever we're making a link in basic normal HTML, we're going to use the A href equals tag. And again, we can go back here. We can see that right here. It says this goes to CNN. If I click it, it does indeed go to CNN, which is great. See, I'm trying to think about what other things might be good to include. Let's see. So we talked about links. Yes, we might as well also talk about divs. So if we go back to our Google page, and I'm going to extract some of this. Let's see if we look in here. So we see here, we have something called a div ID, or more specifically, just a giant div. Where did that go? Here it is. This thing takes up our entire Google web page. But unlike, say, an H1 tag or a header or a title, a div tag on its own doesn't actually do anything. So we can go into, let's go to our demo again, and create some div. So what I could say here is I could say div, and we can say like, this is div 1. And then here I can make a div that has, or that contains, if we want to use a fancier term, all of this stuff. And then I can make a third div, and we can say, this is the last div. And hit save. And let me go back here and run this. And let's new share to here. So the divs basically act as containers for everything within your HTML page. So if we mouse over our whole body here, our whole body is still pretty big, but we can break it up into 3 parts. We can break it up into our first div, which is a small div at the top, then this massive div in the middle. And what is this massive div in the middle? This contains our H1, our H2, our break return, our bold text, and our ahref. And then the last part is this div 3, which is our last div. Now, what is the benefit, you might ask, of using divs if all it looks like it's doing is just spacing things out using, it basically looks like we're spacing things out using break returns, right? No. So the reason that we use divs in HTML is so that we can split up our content into pieces. So imagine that we had an actual like fully functioning website. So we had like a nav bar at the top with like your home, your about, your other links. then you have like your page title, then you have like your, let's say that you're designing like a shopping website. So you've got your nav bar at the top, right? That has like your shopping cart and your login and your main links. Then you have like the title page or the title that's like the company logo. Then under that you have like this like sale descriptions, and then like a table of like all of the shirts and stuff you can buy or whatever. Imagine if all of those elements were in one HTML document with no way to tell the difference between each of those things. That sounds really bad and also just not fun. The div basically lets us separate out those different elements of our web page. It lets us group content together really nice and easy. See, I'm trying to think about what other things we can talk about. Oh, yes, there's also lists. Let's do that real quick too. So in our first div, here, so remember how I said that we can nest elements together, which is what we're basically doing with our divs. Well, a list is a really good example of, let me make sure I'm sharing VS Code. I am, perfect. So a list is a really good example of how we can nest things together. So there are 3 types of lists that we have. We have ordered lists. We have, let's see if I remember, unordered lists. And we also have, I think we should have menus, but let me remember if that shows up the way that I'm thinking. That might not work actually. Let's see. Okay, so we've got our 3 types of lists. Now, an ordered list, let's move this to the side and mouse over it. It represents a list of items, which the items are intentionally ordered. What on earth does that mean? Well, an ordered list is basically, it's going to create, it creates basically a normal list using a number or a letter on the left. So to create a list element, we use li, and we could say like element, or we could say like first element, then we can make another one that's like second element, and just for kicks, let's do a third element in our list. Now let's copy the same thing over to here, and we'll copy the same thing into our menu. So if we go, oh, I guess we could also just label these. We could say this like an H3. We could say this is ordered list. Then down here, might as well just make this an unordered list. And then down here, we can make this like a menu. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to our website. And let me make a new share again. So we see here that I have 3 different types of lists. So we've got the ordered list, which again, by default, it has numbers. So it goes 1, 2, 3. You've got your unordered list, which is your bullet points, and a menu, which is basically the same thing as an unordered list, but I think there are some differences for how it orders / organizes things. And again, we see that these are all, again, we're still using that containerized thing. So our first div has all of our lists. Then we can go to, let's say, our ordered list, and we can go to our first list element. And our first list element has a marker. What is the marker? The marker is the 1. And then our first element, text. So if we wanted to get to our first element text, we would have to go first HTML, then go into the body, then go into the div that contains everything, which is this whole thing, then go into the ordered list, or overall list thing, then go to the list element, and then we get to the first list element. So remember, this whole thing is all boxes all the way down. So again, we got the body box, we got a div inside of that, we've got an ordered list inside of that, and then we've got our list element inside of that. So if you ever get confused as to where something is in HTML, just remember to go basically look for the boxes. There are other things that we can do in HTML. We can embed images, for example. So let's see if I can find an image very quickly. Let's do car photo. Let me find a car. That looks like a car. So we'll take that. Let me right click it. We'll copy the image address, paste it in here very quickly. Okay, that looks like it works. That is a very long link, but that's fine. And let's go back to our HTML demo. We can do this in, let's say, the last div. So to load up an image, we use an IMG element. So in order to specify where our image is coming from, we have to then use the src tag, which basically gives us the URL, says, hey, what's the URL of our image? And that is this absolute monstrosity that I just got from my browser. And then we'll just have it self-close itself at the end using this slash inside. So let's save this, go back here. Let me reshare my first web page, and there we go. So again, here we have this absolutely massive image of a car that we just loaded in. Now we can resize this image if we want to by adding in more tags. So we can specify, oh, I'm not sharing that. Let me go back here. We can specify, let's see, you guys can now see my VS Code, correct? Okay, yeah, so we can specify that image on the page that we just saw was absolutely massive. Let's say I want to fit this image into, let's say the width, I want it to be 100 pixels, and we're going to specify the height is going to be like 400 pixels. So I can specify just how big or small I want my image to be. And we can go back to the website, and we now see here the image has been transformed to be 100 by 400 pixels. And again, so how can we see that? Well, we can go into our last div. We see here we've got our image. We have our source, which is a big link. We have the width of the image, which I specified to 100, and the height, which I specified to 400. Now I could easily change this to, let's say, a width of 200, and we see that the width expands. And if I mouse over this box, we see that the box that contains our image has also expanded. And that still lies within this whole big div at the end. Let's see, I'm just trying to think about if there's anything else. Oh, go ahead.
Where did your slash go on that one to close the image?
So that one disappeared from here because the slash itself isn't needed for an image. Because the image tag self-closes. So what I mean by that is, if we look back at, let's say, like the body tag has a slash body at the end of it. Like our div has a div and then a slash div. That's because the body and div and other tags like that, they contain stuff within them, right? So I mean, if you open up those three little dots, the div tag has stuff inside it. But if we look back at, let me see, the break return tag, for example. A break return is literally just like hitting the enter key. The enter key doesn't have any content associated with it. So it doesn't need a slash on it. The image tag is the same way. Like you don't have an image and then you can't really put stuff inside of an image tag. It doesn't the image can't contain anything. So that's why you don't need a slash for it. But in my personal experience, it's good practice to add one just for a self-closing tag. So for image, I usually like to add in a slash for it. For break returns, you'll often see people do the same thing. You'll see people do something like this, which again basically means that it's like BR and then /BR. But the /BR tag doesn't exist, so we use this to specify that it's closing upon itself. Any other questions about any of the stuff that I just went over? I know this was pretty quick, but we've got a little bit more to cover for tonight. Okay, so there's a couple of other things that we can talk about. One of them is tables. So we can create tables in HTML. So let's do that. Let's do that here. So we'll make a new div for it. Why not? So we'll make a div. We can put it in here, and we can say we can create a table by just using the table command. And it says here, a table element represents data with more than one dimension. So I can create a table. What can I do with this table? Well, there's a few things we can do with the table. Number one, we can specify what's in the table body. We can specify a template, a text area. But what I'm looking for is t head. And what this basically says is I want to create a header for my table. Using that, we can then create, or you know what? Actually, let's not do the header just yet. Let's keep that blank for now. We can create the body of the table using tBody. So every table needs to have a body. It does not need to have a head. It does not need to have a footer, but it's good to have. And when we create a table body, we have to go row and then cell. So what I'll do for creating the table body is I'll create a new table row, which is, again, TR represents a row of cells in a table. And then inside of that, I use TD, where the D stands for data cell. I don't know why the D stands for two words, but that's how it is. And I can create my data cell, and I can say this is data cell 1. And then I can create another one that is data cell 2. And this is all in one row. So the TR here is row 1. Then I can create another row of my table, and we can do the same thing. We can say data cell 3, and then I can do another thing here, and we'll say data cell 4. And then for my table header, I can create a new table row, let's say, and wrong button. Then we can create, let's see if I remember the command for this. It should be th, yeah, which is a header cell. No, why are you going there? There we go. And we can create a header cell with, I believe it should be call span equals 2. And you can say, I am a table header. So what does the call span mean? So again, this is part of our table header tag. And this basically says that the cell that I'm going to create this in is going to span both columns. So let's go back to the web page. Let me refresh it. So as you can see here, we now have a table. Granted, it is a very ugly table and doesn't have any separators or anything inside of it. But inside of our div, we see that we have a table. Now, how do I know this is a table? Well, we've got a table header at the top. Then I've got my table body, and we've got rows. We've got the first row, and we have a second row. Then we have, in our first row, we have one data cell, and then a second data cell. And we have the exact same thing in the next row. And all of this is within our table. So again, whenever we're creating a table, remember that we have a table header and a table body, just like for HTML. And we have to create things by rows. So you have table row and then your table cell. go back to VS Code one more time just to make sure that we've covered everything HTML wise that you'll need to know for today. So, see, we talked about table headers, we talked about tables, we talked about divs, we talked about including images, we talked about headers. So that's basically all of most of the HTML that we're going to need for tonight. We're going to take a 10-minute break in a minute or two. But before we do you guys have any questions about what HTML is, how the block structure works, anything about the individual tags that I can answer?
When you were like designing a website, do you take into account the size of a screen at all, or is it just like a default 16:9 1080p maybe?
That is a good question. And that's something that we're going to get to a little bit in a few minutes. But to answer your question more generally, yes and no. So for some things, like for example, if we go to that image that I created with a really long link, I set the width and height of it to be in pixels. I said this is going to be 10 pixels by 400 pixels. Now, if I have like a screen that's, let's say, like 10,000 pixels tall and like 10,000 wide, and I need this to show up in like 4K resolution, that's not going to happen. So either you can change the pixel values for every single screen size, which would suck, or you can make the pixel, the width and height values equal to a percentage of the screen size. So that's generally the approach that gets taken. But then you have problems where most computer screens are 16:9 or 16:10. But if you're on a phone, your phone kind of has like inverse proportions of it. So if you stack a bunch of things together, like width-wise, it's going to look absolutely awful. You'll have like half a character showing up a lot. So for that reason, a lot of places will have special mobile optimized sites that are designed specifically with that smaller, thinner profile in mind. So this is stuff that we'll get into more as over the next 2 weeks, and definitely once you guys start making your own sites. But sometimes you do take that into account, sometimes you don't.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Okay, so let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and then after that, we'll get into talking about CSS. Awesome. All right, so now that the break is over, let's start talking a little bit about CSS. So remember that website that we just created? That was a pretty boring website. I'm pretty sure all of us can agree. Like, here, we can just open it up and look at it, honestly. And this looks absolutely terrible. We've got like bright white in the background, black in the foreground. It's all Times New Roman, which is a font that nobody really likes. The link looks completely underwhelming. This looks like a very awful website. And to be very honest, I don't think I would ever visit a web page like this. So let's change that. Let's see if we can make our website just a tiny little bit prettier. So how do we do this? Well, if we go back to those notes that I was talking about at the beginning, everything that we just did is all pure HTML, which is, again, it creates all the stuff we see on the website. So whether it was those blocks of divs and list elements that we created, whether it's just like putting text on the page or like inserting that image, that was all HTML. But we can use CSS, or cascading style sheets, to make our web page honestly just better and less bad. So what's the difference between, or how can I add in CSS? So there's 3 ways that we can add in CSS into our web pages. So we can add it in inline. Well, let's do that. Where's a good place? Yeah, here, let's do it here. So let's say for my div, I want to modify my div. For that, we're going to use the style attribute or tag. So we can say style equals, and now we get a ton, and I mean a ton of options. I mean, look at how many options we have. Like I can keep scrolling for a long time and my fingers will probably get tired. So we're not going to do it. But I can change, let's say, the height of my div. I can change the amount of padding. So remember how each of these things is a block? Well, we can change the padding on the block. I can also change the color of the text. So let's say inside of my first div, I want to make everything, let's say I want to make it a dark orchid. That sounds rather nice. So we can say style equals, and then this inside here, this is an example of CSS. So you'll notice in format, this looks really similar to a dictionary or a key value pair. And that's basically all CSS is. It's setting a bunch of properties about your website and the things in your website using key value pairs. In this case, I'm setting the property of color to the value dark orchid. And if we go back to our first web page and we refresh it, we see here, ooh, very nice. Everything in div 1 has this very pretty styling on it that colors it purple. Now, why is this not applied to div 2 to the next div or the one after? Why is it only on this one? Well, we specified here that the style is only going to be applied to our first div. That's why we wrote here in the style equals color dark orchid bit. So that's one way that we can apply CSS to our web page. I'll go through more examples of what CSS is momentarily, though. Don't worry. There is another one that we can use. We can create an internal style sheet. So we can do that in the header. So remember, the header is where you'll generally put your overall style sheets. Oops, not STYL. That should have an E on it. The header is where you'll put like your title. You'll put your style sheets. You'll often link your scripts. So like everything that's like not shown on the website immediately, you're gonna put it in the header. So we can create a style sheet up there. And let's say that we want this to be attached to, let's say that I want to modify my link. So we can say, we'll say which tag it's going to modify. So this is going to modify the A tag. Then we're going to use curly brackets to say what we want to do with our A tag. What do we want to do with the A tag? Let's say that I want to change the color of my link from whatever weird blue it was. Let's say I want to change the color of my link to lawn green. That sounds absolutely terrible, but let's do that. And I can go here and I can put a semicolon. So we use semicolons to separate our CSS commands. But in HTML, which is, remember, HTML is all the angle brackets. CSS is all of the curly brackets. So by setting the style up here in the header, I'm saying, all right, for all the A tags, which, where are the A tags? Our A tag is, where is it? Right here. This guy, I want to change the link color to this yucky bright green. And if we go back to my first web page and I refresh the screen, as we can see here, this thing is now in this very ugly green that we specified up in our header in the style right here. We can do other things than just changing the link or the color of the thing. We can also set the background color. So a nice way to do it is for divs. So we can set background color like so. let's say I want the background color to not be glaringly bright white, so that doesn't hurt your eyes. Let's say I wanted to change it to, ooh, the dark slate gray looks very nice. Then we just add in background color, and we specify what it is, and we separate these from each other by using our semicolons. We can do the same thing for our A tag too. Let's say we want to change our background color of our A tag to be something equally atrocious. Yeah, I'll change this midnight blue, let's say. So let's go back to our web page and preview our changes. So I haven't refreshed the web page just yet. Remember, all of the background here is all white because we never set it to anything else anyway. Now it's completely different. Why is it different? Well, if we look at our A tag down here and we go identify the elements of it, I can click this and we see that my A tag takes up that tiny little 100 pixel by 17.33 pixel box in our website. If we go to this again, we see it has an auto by auto sizing. And we see that in our style thing up here, we specify that the link color is going to be lawn green, which if I take this guy and mouse over it, we see indeed that the color is lawn green and the background of that tag is that weird blue. Now, similarly for, didn't want to do that. For our div, which is this big guy up here, I specified the color as dark orchid of the text, which all the text inside it is that color. And I specified the background color as this dark slate gray, which it is. But note, that background color only applies to this div. It does not apply to this guy. It does not apply to this guy. And it doesn't apply to that guy either. So this is basically what CSS is useful for. If you want to add styling to your web page, there are other things you can do besides changing colors. You can change the width of components. We can change the height. You can change the font. You can add a border or a box around things. There's a lot of different options that you have when playing with CSS. We're not going to go into all of those right now. But, I guess there is one other thing I should probably mention. CSS is not just included inside of your HTML file. We can also create a special CSS styling page document. So we save it with a .css extension. So I'm calling this styling. And we write this basically using the exact same format as we did in here. So let's say I wanted to edit all of the div tags. We could change all of the divs to have the background color of that, whatever purpley color that is. And we have this styling.css page, which is great. But right now, I have no way of taking that CSS and putting it into my HTML. How can I do that? Well, in order to take our CSS and put it into our HTML, I need to use a link. So in order to do this, we'll go back into our head and we'll use the link tab, which as says here, allows others to link your document to other resources. Specifically, right now, what I'm going to use it for right now is linking to our style sheet. So this is kind of like the Ahref, but not. So first thing that we're going to do is we're going to say the relationship. So using rel. And there are a couple of types of relationships, but the one we're going to use right now is the style relationship, because CSS is, again, a style sheet. This is going to set the style sheet or the style sheet of our HTML page. After that, we need to say what type of style sheet it is. So we can say type, then we're going to set this equal to text/CSS. So we'll say type is text/CSS. And then the last thing that we need to do is set the location using the href, and we set the location as styling.css. And now we have our inserted our style link inside of our page. So what does our styling do? Remember, it says that for every single div, the background color is going to be this weird purple thing. If we go back to our first web page here, we see that that is not the case right now. But we run this, and indeed, here we have our first div up here, our second div down here, our third div, and our fourth div. Now, question for everybody. This div, that div, this div, they all have that weird purple as the background. Why is that not the case for the first div? This guy is still that weird gray color.
It's because you styled it inline.
Right. So whenever we style something inline here, that is almost always going to take precedence over whatever you specify inside your style sheet. So if I wanted to go to my style sheet, I can see my style sheet in here. It says div background color that. But because I have inline specified, the background color of my div, that's going to supersede the what we set in our CSS document. And this is super helpful because, again, let's say that you're designing a web page and you need some information to really stand out or be shown in a different way from everything else on that page. If your page is all in this purple color, but you need some information to flash out at the user, you can just specify in your div or in whatever thing it is, hey, override the default properties that you set in your style sheet, and it'll do that. Which is why for the first div, it shows up with the custom set color, not the one that we specified in our style. See, trying to think about what other things to bring up. Let's see. So we talked about the box models. We talked about basic CSS and styling.
I had a question for the inline example. Because that styling is on the div, does that mean that if you tried to change the background of any of the children of that div, that you probably wouldn't be able to?
You know what? We can try it and see. So we'll say style here. We'll say that the background color of this guy is what's something that's different enough. Yeah, forest green. That looks like it'll be a different color. So we can change that. We'll save it. Oops, that's not the right browser page. Where's my... We can change that. Hit refresh. So in this first overall div, we set the first overall div to override the default that we set in our styling of purple. But in our element, which is this ordered list thing down here, I set the background color to forest green, which is not the same as the yucky green that is in the rest of that div. So it overrides the property. Why? Because we're inline within an inline, basically. Where it's I don't think nested inline is the right word, but it's essentially the same principle. And what this says is whenever you use a style tag, it'll basically automatically override the properties that you set above when there is a conflict. So you'll notice here for the style, for example, I never specified what the text color of these guys was going to be. But for this guy, I did specify the text color. I said, hey, the text color is going to be dark orchid. And it's dark orchid everywhere in there. Inside the ordered list, I never specify the text color. So it says, okay, well, the text color must be the same thing. So it must be a dark orchid text color. But because I'm specifying the background color, it's saying, all right, I need to override the background color from the default to this new value. So whenever you specify an inline style like this, it will override the inline styles of its parent elements. if you tell it to do that.
I guess the last question I would have about it is like, you don't have a choice but to inline style that children element, right? Like if you tried to put that child element on the style sheet, then it just wouldn't be able to actually change the background.
That's a good question. You know what? Let's try it and see. So we'll go here. We can take this out. We'll go to our styling.css and we'll do the same thing. So just like we did for the div, we'll say that we want to change stuff for our OL tag, and I'll specify my background color is forest green. Let's save that. And let's go back to our web page. We'll go here. Yeah, so Philip, it looks like you are correct. So even though we specified it just now inside of our inline or our style sheet that we imported, it looks like the div style that we inline set here is going to override it.
Could you put a class in there and override it?
Yes, so theoretically, if we wanted to do that, you could put in a class or an ID element if you wanted to. Yes, I mean we can try that right now actually. So let's go back to code. Let's specify the class. So I guess I should also mention, Ken, you kind of anticipated this, but we have, going back to the div example, we have like 1, 2, 3, 4 divs in our HTML file. That's a lot of divs. How do we know how the divs are different? Well, we can specify those using the very helpful class and ID tags. So, for example, for the second div, I can specify that the class of this div is called, let's just say, class 1. And for example, and if we go down here, we can specify our dot class 1, and we can say, yeah, let's custom set the background color of that. Oh, do not use empty rule sets. Here, let's do that. And let's change the background color of this to red. And do that and run it in here. So this is basically how we can change that using our classes like this, using again by setting the div class, we can change the individual attributes of the elements within our div like that. And you can use ID to do the same thing. Let's see. I think that's about it for the material you guys should need for today's assignment. Do you guys have any questions?
Did that end up changing the color? I'm still seeing your VS Code.
Oh, whoops. Sorry about that. Here, let me rerun the share there. Okay, so this is still VS Code. Where'd my browser go? Here we go. So if we refresh this and we go up here, it's still in line. Or it's still not overriding it completely. So if we go down, My mouse is getting stuck. So here we have our div class is class 1. If we go to our sources and then to our styling, we see here that for all divs that are set as class 1, I want the background color to be red. However, that isn't overriding it in this specific instance.
Yeah,
But
I was
that
just
definitely
curious because of the specificity, I guess. Like I found out about it like after I had tried to write some web pages. But I remember like I think from what I remember, it's like 1,000 points for like an inline style, and like I want to say like 1 for a tag, 10 for a class, and like 100 for an ID. So like if you inline style, I think like a parent element, I think like there's if you want to style any of the children, like I think you don't really have much of a choice besides inline styling the rest of the elements.
yeah, I think that sounds similar to what I remember reading. I think that there's something in the module for today that talks about the specific weights. But yeah, I think you are correct about that. And again, inline basically trumps all. So is the main rule.
What would happen in your CSS style sheet, the external one, if you just moved like the red above the purple?
So
Would that
you're
do anything?
saying like
Because
moving this
the
guy
because
up
yeah,
here?
yeah, would that now take higher priority over the RGB purple?
Let's see. Yeah, indeed it does.
Nice.
So yeah, it's in addition to it being an inline. So remembering going back up here, the inline blocks that we set here overtake the normal in order or overtake the style sheet in order of preference, but also in the style sheet, things you put first overtake things you put later. So if we go back to our sources, even though here we have both div and div class 1, the fact that we put div class 1 first means that the web page is going to read that first and be like, okay, this is more important than specifying the general div after. And then similarly, that's the reason why in here we have our ordered list. And for that, I set to send the background color as forest green, but it hasn't recognized that because this comes after. But if I see if I can paste this in, because if we change around the order and say, hey, I want the ordered list forest green to override the div being this weird background color, then I just need to move it up 1. Any other questions about, again, how for CSS, or just to summarize, we need to end everything using a semicolon inside of our CSS documents. We need to use the curly brackets in order to separate them out. To specify stylings, we specify the tag that it's referring to. So like the div tag here refers to all div tags. And if we want to refer to a specific class, we do the dot and then specify the class name. And then that's what we are doing down here. We're saying that the div has specific class. We can also specify this using IDs as well. So you can set the div class and the div ID, but not just for div. You can set this for divs, for body elements, for headers, for a lot of things. You can attribute a class and an ID too. Then it's essentially it's up to you at that point. Yeah, that's about it. So any questions I can answer now about HTML or CSS before we move into today's assignments?